So why was God saying, behold, man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil, when they had eaten the forbidden fruit? Had they experienced negative when they have the knowledge of good and evil? Isn't it isn't it good to have the knowledge of good and evil? So he was confused and he wanted to be clarified. And so I appreciated his question because he was honest, and that is where an explanation has to come in. It's not actually defending a position, but trying to explain the meaning. So perhaps it is part of apologetics to explain, but you are not there to defend. Another instance, actually, I had been asked few times already with this question when Jesus said in Matthew 16:18, thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. It is still future. It implies that there was no existence of the church yet because he is going to build it in the future. I will build my church. Does not mean that Christ has no church at the time when he was having his ministry because his church is still yet to be built in the future. But the Bible also made it clear in Hebrews that Israel was a church. In fact, it was called church in the wilderness in the book of Hebrews. So it was a church in the wilderness. So there was already an existing church. Israel itself was a church. And let us say the church had backslidden, had apostatized. But there is always a remnant church, meaning there are always those who remain faithful. So if there was a church during the time of Christ, let's say, for example, his followers, his disciples, did they not constitute a church? But why did he say, I will build my church? But that was in chapter 16. That is why I added, I said, let me add, uh, let me strengthen your uh, question by making this reinforcement. So I said, in fact, Matthew 18 says, if somebody commits mistake or sin, go and tell him between you and him alone. If he does not listen, bring two or three. But if still he does not listen to two or three, then tell it to the church. And if still he does not listen to the church, then treat him as a publican or a Gentile or a sinner. Tell it to the church. Why did Jesus say tell it to the church if there was no church? But why did he say, I will build my church? But why did he say that if there is a problem with a brother, if he does not listen to two and three, tell it to the church? Is there no conflict? When Jesus said, I will build my church, yet there was already an existing church during his time. In fact, it could be questioned whether his followers, his disciples, even including John the Baptist, and other faithful followers, were they not part of his church? Could they not be considered a church? Did they not constitute a church? So those are some questions that needs to be explained. But you are not there to defend a contrary position where the other party has an opposite or different position compared to yours. But in apologetics, you have to defend your position, your doctrine, your teaching, because the other side may have a hostile or opposite position that is being taken. I hope that is very clear. But I have presented to you last time that Socratic method in apologetics is very, very useful. So what is Socratic method? This is answering question with a question. This is a very effective method in apologetics if it is used wisely. And this technique is called Socratic method. So answering question with question is known as Socratic method. So asking a series of questions to challenge beliefs and expose contradictions, leading to a deeper understanding or a shift in perspective. So the objective of Socratic method is for him to ponder and to bring him to a deeper understanding so he could either shift his perspective. For example, Acts 10, they would always say it is very clear that in Acts chapter 10, all kinds of animals have already been declared clean in verse 14 and 15 of chapter 10. So perhaps you may need an explanation, but sometimes when you explain, it takes time, and the more when you explain, they could raise more question. And what I usually do is instead of directly giving an explanation, I would ask them a question to let them realize that there is a problem with their understanding, because their understanding is that the animals that was in a vision or when Peter was in a trance were literal animals. Secondly, those animals, all kinds of animals that were in the sheet were all clean, declared clean. And so what I usually do is to ask question so they can come to a realization that their understanding was erroneous. So, Socratic method. So, the goal of the Socratic method in apologetics is not necessarily to win an argument. While there is there, you will win an argument, but that is not the goal. But your goal is to help the other person think critically. So, they will be able to think critically about their own beliefs and to potentially find a more compelling understanding of a particular idea of truth. So they may have some assumptions, so you challenge their assumptions. Usually, for example, against Sabbath, the most common argument against the Sabbath is that the Sabbath belongs to the old covenant. And they would cite a text in Deuteronomy 4:13 that the Ten Commandments is a covenant that was established between God and Israel. So if it was a covenant, it belongs to the old covenant. The Ten Commandments belong to the old covenant. And the old covenant is already done away with. It is vanishing away. It becomes obsolete. So why do you still keep the Sabbath, which belongs to the old covenant? So that is the point. That is the common, what is this? Common objection or common argument against Sabbath keeping, because they would quote Deuteronomy 4:13. And if I'm trying to uh what is this? Find it. It says in so he declared to you his covenant which he commanded you to perform. So he declared to you his covenant which he commanded you to perform, the 10 commandments, and he wrote them on the 2 tablets of stone. So the covenant that God declared with Israel is the 10 commandments. And what was that? That is the Sinaitic covenant. That is the old covenant. And so if Hebrews made clear that the old covenant was faulty, the old covenant is vanishing, the old covenant is obsolete, why are you still keeping the Sabbath if it belongs to the old covenant? Socratic method could be very useful to let him realize that his conclusion or his understanding has some fault or error. So you expose contradictions and then you seek clarification. So the benefit of Socratic method in apologetics is you promote critical thinking. You lead that person to a deeper understanding. And you can be a respectful and it is a respectful and an engaging way to share one's belief. So in essence, the Socratic method is a way to engage in dialogue, promote critical thinking, and help others explore their beliefs in a way that can lead to a deeper understanding of truth. So the Bible has recorded statements that are fairly described as examples of Socratic questioning. In fact, Jesus in his interactions with his critics, because there were those who would like to trap Jesus. For example, he was challenged about paying taxes. The response of Jesus was, whose image is on the icon? Remember, there were those who were prejudiced. There were those who would like to trap Jesus. There were those who would like Jesus to fall in their trap. But Jesus, instead of directly answering them their question with yes or no, he instead returned them with another question. So he answered their question with question. The same is true when Jesus responds by using questions in his encounters with the rich young ruler and also with Governor Pilate. That is why in 1 John 4:1, it says, Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but try. So trying the spirits is very, very important. So for example, when the Pharisees tried to trap Jesus with a political question about paying taxes to Caesar, you'll find the story in Matthew 22:15-22, when Jesus asked, whose image and inscription is this? So the Socratic function in this instance is that rather than giving a yes or no answer, he uses a question to turn the trap around. So this forces the Pharisees to acknowledge the authority of Caesar in the civic realm while preserving the sacredness of what belongs to God. Another is, why do you call me good? So here the context was that the rich young ruler calls Jesus good teacher, and he asks how to inherit eternal life. And Jesus was asking him in return, why do you call me good? No one is good but God alone. So here, Jesus was challenging the man's understanding of goodness and subtly nudges him, touches him to recognize who really Jesus is, that he is a divine being, by using a probing question rather than a direct statement. Another Socratic method that Jesus used was when the chief priests and elders they were questioning the authority of Jesus. So instead of answering them where or what authority did he have in doing his ministry and preaching, he instead asked them question in return. He said, was the baptism of John from heaven or from man? So he was asking them question. And so they tried to evade. And in their evasion, Jesus said, if you will not tell me, because they were arguing among themselves, if you will tell them that, because Jesus asked the question, was the baptism of John from heaven or from man? So they were arguing among themselves. If they will see from man, blah, blah, blah. If you will see from heaven, so they have united to respond to Jesus that we do not know. And the answer of Jesus was, I will not also tell you. If you cannot tell me where was the baptism of John coming from, if you cannot tell me, then I cannot also tell you. So he uses a question to expose their unwillingness to answer honestly. Thereby, their hypocrisy was revealed. Paul also used Socratic method when he asked the question to the philosophers at Areopagus. He said, are your gods real? He said, men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are, and in every way you are very religious. Then he discusses their altar to an unknown God. So Paul here, in this instance, used or started with a compliment by telling them that they were religious. Then he uses questioning logic to lead them to see the inconsistency of worshiping an unknown God. So then he introduced the true God as the one that they had ignorantly worshipped. Another question raised by Paul is in Romans 3. The context was Paul was anticipating objections and asked questions that he expects his readers to ask. He said, what advantage then is there in being a Jew? Because he was confronting the Jews. So Paul here engages the reader in a self-questioning dialogue that mirrored a debate to walk them through a theological conclusion. Another is in Romans 2, when he was addressing the hypocrites among religious Jews. He asked them, you who preach against stealing, do you steal? He was asking a series of direct questions challenging their consistency. So these questions highlighted an internal contradictions in their behavior versus their teaching. So what you will find here is what is this? The summary of Socratic method used by Jesus and Apostle Paul. So the purpose here in whose image is this is Jesus was redirecting the question and he revealed deeper truth without direct confrontation. In why call me good, his technique was in defining our definitional probing, was trying to probe them of really whether he was honest in saying that he was good. Jesus made him clear that only the Father is good, only God is good. But when he said that he was good, there must be an implication to it. So he was challenging an assumption about moral categories. Paul also in Areopagus, he was engaging his audience on their terms by redirecting to them the gospel. And he anticipates objections and he dismantled them logically. So, let us say, for example, here is a challenger. Should Christians obey a secular government that promotes things contrary to God? So, Jesus-style Christian apologist, if you are an Adventist apologist, he could make a return question, can make a return question. Can I ask, whose authority is reflected in the laws we live under? For example, whose name is on your national ID? So he may answer, the government, of course. Then you may say, oh, then give to the government what belongs to it, but ask yourself, what belongs to God? So the tactical point here is that you are redirecting a political trap into a spiritual reflection. That is exactly what Jesus did. For example, you might be able to encounter some skeptics or some, what is this? Some unbeliever, let us say a Muslim, when he said, I don't believe Jesus is God, but I do think he was a good moral teacher. So you may answer using Jesus style. Yeah, that's interesting. Can I ask, what do you mean by good? If Jesus was a good moral teacher, he claimed to be the Son of God. Would a truly good man lie or tell a lie about that? So you are returning a question. Perhaps he would reply, well, I guess he wouldn't. Remember, he would say, I don't believe Jesus is God, but I do think he was a good moral teacher. To the Muslim, they would just say he was a prophet. But here, you can ask in return. So this is a Socratic model. So you may say, so if he was not telling the truth, would he still be good? Or maybe he was telling the truth. So the point here is you gently press definitions and force a choice using questions. So this is a classic, either he is a lord or a liar or a lunatic approach which Socratics applied. For example, to the unknown God, they believe that there is God, but unknown. So if you are an apologist using Paul's style, you may say, oh, for example, he would say, I believe in a higher power, but I don't think anyone really knows who or what it is. That is why unknown God. So you can reply by saying, that's actually really thoughtful. Can I ask, if that higher power did try to make himself known, would you want to know him? So here now, an entry point. Here is now your entry point. So this spiritual seeker would say, of course. Then you say, what if I told you he's already done that? He has already done that, and even has left signs in creation and history about that God. Could I share what I believe what he has revealed? So, by using their own belief as a launching point, you can lead them with a permission-seeking questions toward revelation. So that is answering question with question. For example, because if there is, let's say you encounter an atheist, your objective is you will use questions to challenge naturalistic assumptions, because usually atheists are naturalistic scientists. They believe only in what can be observed, what can be tested, what can be experimented, etc. So here you will challenge naturalistic assumptions, and you would highlight moral and metaphysical implications of atheism. You can even introduce the plausibility of the existence of God even without preaching. Let's say, for example, an atheist with an SDA apologist. Let's say the atheist would say, I don't believe in God. There is no evidence. And science explains everything we need to know. And science cannot prove that there is God. Science cannot make an experimentation of the existence of God. Science cannot really prove, even in the laboratory, that there is God. So, there is no evidence. So, an SDA apologist, by using Socratic style, you may respond, that's interesting. But may I ask, when you say no evidence, because you said, I don't believe in God, there is no evidence. So you ask, when you say no evidence, what kind of evidence would actually count for you? Then you have to wait a response because many people haven't thought about this. Perhaps he may reply, I guess something observable or testable. So these are scientific language. Something that is testable, experimentable, observable. So he may say, I guess something observable or testable. Then you reply, like we test things in a laboratory? Then he might reply, yeah, like that. Then you ask him, do you think all real things must be testable in a laboratory? His natural response would be, well, yes. Then you ask him, because the premise is all real things must be testable in a laboratory. The naturalistic scientist will reply, yes. Then you ask him the question, can I test the laws of logic or the existence of moral truths in a laboratory? Here he is a problem now because what answer could he give? Because he has already said that all real things is testable, observable in a laboratory. But here you are asking me a question. So you are nudging them to see that not all truth claims are scientific. So here, his reply or natural response would be, no, but those are still real. Then you say, yes, you're right. So if there are real things beyond science, could it be possible that God is one of those things? So you have to let this settle. So he is now put in a quandary, meaning he is now led to think and make a deeper contemplation of his position. Perhaps his answer would be, maybe, but there is still no need for a God to explain the universe. So there is no need for a God to explain the universe. Then you answer, can I ask, why does anything exist at all instead of nothing? Why does anything exist at all instead of nothing? Why is there something instead of everything, nothing? Then the atheist may say, well, maybe the universe just exists. Or maybe it came from a quantum vacuum. Then you as an apologist would reply by asking question, would you say a quantum vacuum is nothing or something? Then the normal reply is, I guess it's something. Because quantum vacuum is not nothing, it is something. Then you say, so the question remains, why is there something rather than nothing at all? So this kind of questioning, this is the Socratic method. So the atheist and the is the apologist, with this dialogue and conversation, you are trying to push him to further reconsider his preconceived understanding. So you don't have to rush to the gospel. but you are softening the ground by undermining the idea that science explains everything. It is really wrong to assume that science explains everything because morality and even logic cannot be experimented in a laboratory. So you ask about definitions. What do they mean by evidence? What do you mean by truth? What do you mean by nothing? Why is there something instead of nothing? And then you are exposing hidden assumptions. So often, atheism is based on materialistic assumptions, never been critically examined. That is why it's high time by asking question that their assumption is being examined. And then you aim for internal tension. Help them feel the weight of unanswered questions, not just answer them for them. So let them realize. So, for example, I don't believe in God because there is no evidence that there is God. Then you may ask the question, what kind of evidence would convince you that God exists? So you are returning a question to them. That is the goal there is you clarify their assumption. By pressing implications, you ask the questions, are there real things we cannot test scientifically? In other words, there are real things that cannot be tested scientifically, like moral truths, like logic, etc. This cannot be experimented in a laboratory. By that, you are trying to broaden their epistemology. And then, by dealing with philosophical knowledge, you ask the question, why is there something rather than nothing? So you are trying to trigger their existential reflection. Because things that can be touched, that can be seen, that can be tasted, that can be sensed, etc., are considered something. Why are they there in the first place? What caused them to be there? For example, you see stones, you see leaves, you see water, you see clouds. What caused them to be there? Why are they there instead of nothing there? And on the personal angle, you may ask, if God did exist, would you want to know him? So you are trying to gauge emotional openness. For example, in dealing with Muslim apologists, using a Socratic method in apologetics. Usually Muslim apologists, in fact, I have seen this many times in the YouTube, their challenge. Where did Jesus say, I am God? Worship me explicitly. So, can you find Jesus saying, I am God? So, their argument is that because Jesus did not say, I am God, he is not God. Jesus did not say, worship me. So, therefore, he is not worthy of worship because there are no explicit statement from the Bible that Jesus said himself, I am God. That Jesus said that you have to worship me. So a good Socratic method involves asking thoughtful questions that gently uncover assumptions and lead your conversation partner to reconsider their standards of evidence. Another, for example, which is the most logical answer? For example, the question, what caused the universe? We are dealing with an atheist or naturalistic scientist. What caused the universe to come into existence? And where did the original energy or matter come from? So here, there are only three possible responses to this question. One is the universe created itself. or the universe has always existed, or 3, the universe had to be created. So which of these possible answers that is more logical? So when the answer is the universe created itself, then how can a thing create itself? It has to exist first before it can create. So it must have a beginning. It must have existed first before it can create itself. And it is contrary, I mean, yeah, to the law of contradiction. If the answer is the universe has always existed, it contradicts with the second law of thermodynamics, with the principle that everything, just like a fuel or an energy, if it is used, it reduces its value to be reused. For example, you have a car, and then I would say, okay, I would give you full tank. But you have used up the full tank. The energy through the fuel that you have used can still be reused. Can your car still run? So that is based on the law of thermodynamics. So the universe, if the universe has always existed, it cannot continually function because it needs to fuel itself with energy. And when energy is used up, then it could no longer effectively function. So it cannot be true that the universe has always existed. It must have a beginning. So number 3 is the universe had to be created. Of course, somebody must have caused the universe to exist. And that somebody must be the creator. And you have to be ready when the atheist or a naturalistic scientist or skeptic would make you would ask you a question. If God is the cause of the existence of the universe, what is the cause of his existence? So you have to be ready and be prepared to answer that kind of question. So the common question is, where did God come from? Actually, this question is indicating a misunderstanding of the nature of God because it suggests that God is within or God is bound by the universe and that God is part of the chain of effects within time, where all of which require a cause. We should be prepared to correct the misunderstanding and point out that God does not require a cause. Why? Because he has always existed. God is beyond time. He is not part of the physical universe. God is not a matter. God is a spirit. Not He is not a sequence of energetic reactions. And so the laws of thermodynamics, which place a finite limit on the age of the universe, do not apply to him. Isaiah 46 verse 9 says, remember the former things of old, for I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me. So he cannot be compared. He is incomparable to any matter. He is beyond time. He is beyond space. He is beyond matter. So, when the atheist would ask, where does God come from? So, if you are an SDA, you have to defend. You may answer, God doesn't come from anywhere because God, by definition, is the uncaused, eternal, necessary being. He is not a contingent being. He is a necessary being. So here is a step-by-step answer. Where does God come from? So the question assumes that God is like everything else, that he is a contingent being that must have a cause. But asking where does God come from is like asking what's north of the North Pole. So you even ask the scientist, can you give me an answer? What's north of the North Pole? So it assumes something that doesn't logically follow. So the first cause logic in cosmology and metaphysics, everything that begins to exist has a cause. For example, the universe, it has a cause. But if God is eternal, he did not begin to exist. So he cannot be compared to anything else. Therefore, God doesn't need a cause because he never began to exist. You have to differentiate between the necessary being and a contingent being. A contingent being depends on something else for its existence. So that thing cannot exist without somebody causing it to exist. So for example, television. Or television cannot just uh, exist without somebody making that television. Or a house. That house cannot just exist there without somebody making a house or building the house. Motorcycle. In other words, these are contingent beings. But God is a necessary being and he must exist and cannot not exist. Meaning, he is not caused by anything else because he is a self-existent. Nothing caused him to exist. God is a necessary being. He is the foundational source of all existence. So if the atheist denies God due to lack of a cause, then you ask, then what caused the universe? And where did that cause come from? So you uh, return back a question. If he asks that, no, I don't believe that there is God because there is a lack of a cause. You cannot tell me what is the cause of God's existence. Then you ask him again. So because you are denying God that because there was no cause of his existence, then you ask him, then what caused the universe? And where did that cause come from? So without God, the atheist is still left with an unexplained first cause. There must be a first cause. And that first cause is the uncaused cause. Because often just the nature or the universe itself, without any explanation, what causes it to exist, then his argument has no rational grounding. So that is why, if everything needs a cause, then what caused the cause of the universe? Wouldn't there eventually have to be an eternal uncaused first cause? And why couldn't that be God? That first cause is the uncaused cause. There was no cause for him to exist because he was self-existent. If he existed from everlasting. So in that conversation, you can clarify that God doesn't come from anywhere. He is the uncaused, eternal foundation of reality. If God came from something else, he would not be God. The universe had a beginning, so it needs a cause. But God, as the necessary being, does not. So, the common atheist challenge is, if everything has a cause, then who created God? Where did God come from? So you have given the explanation. So in the category, in the logical response, there is the argument and there is the explanation. In the category of error, the question assumes God is a created being. But by definition, God is uncreated. Asking where God came from is like asking, what's the north of the North Pole? What's the south of the South Pole? It's just like that. And the scientists could not answer that. In the argument of first cause principle, the explanation is everything that begins to exist has a cause. God never began to exist, so he needs no cause. On the argument of the necessary being, the explanation is God is not a contingent being like the universe. God is a necessary being, one who must exist and cannot not exist. He cannot not exist, meaning he must always be there, no beginning at all. On the philosophical consistency, the explanation is, if you deny God due to lack of origin, then what explains the origin of the universe? What explains the origin of matter, the origin of energy, the origin of laws? You recognize as a scientist that there is a law of gravity. Who made that law of gravity? If there is a law, there must be a lawgiver. And there is no other explanation except God. On the argument of self-existence, then you explain that God is not caused. He is not made. He is not dependent. He is the explanation for everything else. So, in Socratic questions to ask the atheist, you may ask the question, do you believe the universe had a beginning? If so, what caused that universe to begin? Then you follow up the question, shouldn't there be something eternal that didn't begin to exist? If everything needs a cause, doesn't that lead to an indefinite regress? So if everything needs a cause, there you go back to an ending going back. But there it must have begun with a being that is uncaused. So if that is the point, you may make a follow-up. Why reject an eternal mind or God, but accept an infinite impersonal universe? You believe in a universe, you believe in the planets, you believe in the asteroids, you accept all these things, but why do you reject an eternal mind? If human has mind, if animals has mind, there must be a greater mind that is beyond all this. If human mind can imagine and produce things that we can see around, that are developed, you see buildings, you see bridges, you see houses, you see vineyards, you see plantations. These are all products of the mind and being executed by man who has a human mind. If these things that exist now, in modern times, are products, tall buildings, airplanes, helicopters, computers, are products of human minds, what about the existence of the universe? Is this not a product of a greater mind, far, far greater than human mind? Why do you reject an eternal mind? And that is the mind of God, who thought all of these things to exist, including your existence. So let's say there is a conversation. The atheist would ask, if everything needs a cause, then where did God come from? So if you are an apologetic SDA, you would reply, that's a good question. So instead of us answering the question, you reply with a question. So this is the Socratic model. If everything needs a cause, then where did God come from? Then you are asking, you answer a question with question. That's a good question. Let me ask you, do you think everything that exists needs a cause? So here is now your question. Then the atheist would answer naturally, yes, of course. Nothing comes from nothing. Then you reply, right. But here is the key. Everything that begins to exist needs a cause. Do you think God began to exist? Then perhaps the normal reply of the atheist would say, well, if God exists, he had to come from somewhere, right? Then you reply, not necessarily. If God is eternal and did not begin to exist, then he would not need a cause. Just like how you might believe the universe existed forever if you were an atheist. So if a universe existed forever, then you believe there is no cause for it to exist. So just like God, but which is more reasonable? Can a universe exist by itself without a cause? Or somebody is behind it? Look at the movement of the stars. Look at the movement of the planets. Look at the movement of the solar system. They are perfectly designed. Can a thing without a mind perfectly design itself? Or somebody is behind putting up everything in its perfect design? Just like the Earth. Why does the Earth continue to rotate on its axis constantly? The moon continues to revolve on the Earth. Every new moon, there is always new moon, full moon, and then the Earth revolves around the sun perfectly in 365 and one-fourth days. Who designed them to move in a speed, in a constant speed, over thousands of years without defecting? Why doesn't the Earth move near to the sun so it will get burned, or move far away from the sun so we will all get cold and will get all ice? So in answering that, just like how you might believe the universe existed forever if you were an atheist, so you are now trying to point back his reasoning. And the normal answer of the atheist is, I guess, but how can something exist without a cause? Then you may reply, let me flip that. How can the universe exist without a cause? Scientific evidence shows the universe began to exist. You say Big Bang, entropy, and all. So wouldn't it make sense that something beyond time, beyond space, and beyond matter caused it? So you are now trying to let him realize that there must be bigger somebody else that caused all of these things to exist. Time, space, and matter. And the atheist might reply, so you're saying God is just the uncaused cause? Then your answer, exactly. Something eternal and necessary must exist. Otherwise, you get an infinite regress of causes. You going backward, finding the first cause, and you will get to nowhere else. There must be somebody who is the cause of everything, and that first cause is not caused at all. He has no cause of his existence. He existed from eternity without any cause. And that is the necessary being. That being is called God. God is timeless. God is immaterial. God is powerful. God is personal. And that sounds like a God. So that is God. The atheist may say, but isn't that just inserting God to plug a knowledge gap? Then you may reply, only if it's arbitrary, but that is not arbitrary. It's a logical necessity. That is the only explanation, the most logical explanation that could be given. If the universe had a beginning, there must be a cause outside the universe. That is not a gap. It is a reasoned conclusion. So, actually, I have encountered an atheist many times already. I think 3 to 4 times. And using Socratic method, they are really put into a difficulty and would lead them to realize that their understanding of realities and their understanding of what is this existentialism has some defect. So if the atheist perhaps asks the question, biogenesis says that life comes from life. So that is the meaning of biogenesis. Life comes from life. If your so-called God is the source of life and the origin of life, then where does his life come from? So again, they are trying to push you to the corner, putting you in a difficult situation because it is highly observable, it is highly scientific, and it has been well established scientifically speaking that life comes from life. It is wrong to say that life comes from non-life. So life begets life, and non-life begets non-life, or it is not even begetting. But only life can produce life. A non-life cannot produce life. Then he may ask the question, if your God is the source of life, if your God is the origin of life, then where does the life of your God come from? Then you have to be prepared to answer that question. So, the most logical answer is God's life is not derived. So it's not taken from something else, from somebody else. The life of our God is self-existent. Biogenesis applies to a physical, biological life, not to an eternal, non-material being like God. In fact, in the Bible, biological life, in fact, the word study, biology is the study of life. That pertains to biological life. But the life that comes from God or inherent of God, which He could share to mankind, is not bios. It is sui, like crown of life, like book of life, like everlasting life. That life is zoe, not bios. So the life of God is not derived. Therefore, biogenesis does not apply to God because biogenesis applies only to physical, biological life. So the atheist would be led to reconsider his understanding that he is misapplying a biological principle to a metaphysical being. So God is not a biological being. God is a metaphysical being. So biogenesis explains how biological organisms come from other biological organisms. But God is not a biological organism. He is a non-physical, He is eternal, and He is a self-existent being. So God is not alive in the same sense humans or animals are. When the Bible or theology says God is living, it means God possesses existence and power in Himself. He is the source of all life, but He is not a product of it. God is life Himself. In fact, Jesus has that claim. I am the way, the truth, and the life. He is life himself. He is not caused by other life. He is not a product of other life. He is life himself. He is the source of all life. He is self-existent. So he is a sea. So that's the study of a city, meaning he exists by his own nature. So God does not receive life. He is life. John 5:26 says, "For as the Father has life in himself, so he has also granted his Son to have life in himself." So he has life in himself. He did not receive life from anybody else or from something else. He is life. So another point is no infinite regress of causes. If everything needs a cause for its life, we get an infinite regress. So logic tells us there must be a first and cause. And that is a necessary being who doesn't derive life, but he is life and gives life, shares life, source of life. So the summary response of biogenesis is a scientific law of for physical organisms. It does not apply to a timeless non-physical God. God's life is not received or caused. He is the source of all life because he is self-existence. He is the uncaused cause. So in optional Socratic response to atheists is, are you applying biogenesis, a principle for physical life, to an immaterial eternal being? Is that fair enough? Wouldn't an eternal being by definition not require a source for its life? Otherwise, it wouldn't be eternal. So this is now the Socratic response to an atheist. So here you have the biogenesis, you have the scientific principle, you have the ascetic, God's self-existence, the necessary being, and on the category of error, they are misunderstanding biological principle for metaphysical one. Because they seem to treat God like a biological entity. No, God is not a biological entity. So the biblical support is the Father has life in himself. He does not receive life from somebody else. God is not served by human hands as if he needed anything because he gives life. In Exodus 3:14, I am who I am. So God is the self-existent one. That is what it means. So in Socratic questions to us, does biogenesis refer to physical material organism or to metaphysical being? Would an eternal being need to receive life from something else, or would he be life itself? If everything needs a source of life, wouldn't that lead to an infinite regress? Of course, he could not explain that. Shouldn't the source of all life be uncaused and eternal by definition? So this would bring him to difficulty. So by having a dialogue, for example, an atheist, you Christians say God is alive and the source of all life. But biogenesis says life comes from life. So where did God get his life from? So your answer is, that's a thoughtful question. Can I ask you, when you say biogenesis, are you referring to life as we know it, like cells, DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid, reproduction? Atheist, yes, biological life. Then you say, right. So would it be fair to apply a biological principle like biogenesis to an eternal immaterial being like God? Answer, well, if God is alive, doesn't that still require a cause? Only if you assume God is the kind of being who receives life. But the Christian claim is different. God's life is not biological. He doesn't have life. He is life. There's a difference when you have life. Human being have life, but God doesn't have life. He is life. Jesus said, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. Atheists would say, oh, that sounds like a convenient way to avoid the question. Then you reply, not really, it's just a different category. It would be like asking, what color is logic? Of course, the scientists could not answer that. What is the color of logic? Or how heavy is number 7? Or how heavy is number 8? Of course, they could not answer that. So the question assumes God is a biological entity when he's really the ground of all existence, the reason anything has life at all. Then he may ask, but how do you know God didn't get his life from something else? So he is asking you a question. You answered, because that would mean that he is not eternal or necessary. And then you'd have to ask where that thing got its life, and on forever. Eventually, you need something that just is, that is life itself, with no beginning and no source. That's what we mean by God. So the atheist could no longer push you, but instead think more deeply that his grounding is defective and very weak. So what you do, the best practices across all three is you ask sincere, open-ended questions. And why it matters? Because it encourages conversation, not confrontation. Then you show respect, build trust, and keep hearts open. Invite reflection, not reaction, helps them examine their own beliefs thoughtfully. So by asking questions using Socratic method, you help them examine their own belief. And then you gently introduce truth. You keep focus on Christ without forcing agreement. For example, Muslim apologists, the common challenge is, show me where Jesus said, I am God, worship me. They might ask, did Jesus ever say, I am God, worship me? So your objective is you reveal their flawed assumption behind the explicit statement. Demand and show Jesus' divine identity through indirect but powerful claims. So, for example, can something still be true even if it's not stated in those exact words? Because they would always claim, show me where Jesus said, I am God. If you cannot show me that Jesus said, I am God, therefore he is not God, because Jesus did not even say that he is God. So you ask the question, can something still be true even if it is not stated in those exact words? So this question gently challenges the demand for a verbatim statement, I am God, by proving their epistemological standard, whether truth must be stated in explicit formulaic language to be accepted. Kay, they would always insist. So you can make a follow-up question, for example, to the Muslim. Do you believe everything the Quran teaches must be stated in exactly those words to be true? If someone claimed to be the president, would you not believe him to be the president unless he says, I am the president? Does the president need to say, I am the president, so that you would believe? Word for word? For example, you are a father and you have many sons. You have college students and you have elementary student, high school student. If you do not say that you are a father, would you not be a father by not saying you are a father? Do you have to say, I am a father, so that you would believe that I am a father, even if you have seen that I have children? Do I need to say, I am a father, so that you would believe that I am a father? Do you need to believe only that Jesus is God unless he says, I am God? So, you are trying to give him back a question that would let him realize that his formula of believing in something is defective and flawed. If Jesus received worship, if Jesus forgave sins, and if Jesus claimed divine authority, what would that mean to a first divine or first century Jewish audience? So these kinds of questions move the conversation beyond surface level demands for specific praises and toward the implications of Jesus' actions and the cultural context of his claims. So, the primary Socratic response question, can something still be true even if it is not stated in those exact words? Because they would always demand, did Jesus say, I am God? You will find that in YouTube, in many challenges of the Muslim apologists. So, you can make a follow-up Socratic questions. Is it possible to claim divinity without using the exact phrase, I am God? Are there other ways to reveal one's identity besides a direct verbal claim? That's what I have cited to you a while ago. Do I need to say, I am a father? Even if evidences would show that I am a father because you can see my children? But you would not believe me that I am a father unless I say I am a father. Would you believe that I am male unless I say I am male? Does the Quran itself teach important doctrines like Tawhid? Tawhid is there's only one God or Muhammad's name in exact formulaic wording. So you return back a question that would put them in a difficulty. So there are actually biblical references supporting that Jesus is God. When in John 8:58 says, before Abraham was, I am. So this is a divine claim. When Jesus said, I and the Father are one. So what was the response of the Jews? They tried to stone him for blasphemy. So they understood that he was making a divine claim. When Thomas said, my Lord and my God, Jesus was affirming the statement of Thomas without correcting him. Jesus forgives sins when only God can do that. And the disciples worshiped Jesus, and Jesus did not stop them from worshiping him. So he accepted worship. And Revelation 1:17-18, I am the first and the last. These are divine titles. You will find it in Isaiah 44:6. And they believed in the Old Testament. So in a role play dialogue, I think we ran out of time. Let me just finish this role play dialogue. Muslim, Jesus never said the words, I am God, worship me. If he really was God, he would have said it plainly. Then is the that's a fair concern. Can I ask you something though? Muslim, sure. Do you believe something can still be true even if it's not stated in those exact words? Muslim, it depends. If it's an important claim like being God, he should have said it directly. He should have said, I am God. Then is the apologist. Let's test that. Do you believe the Quran teaches Tawhid? That Allah is one? So you are now pushing him back, meaning you are answering him a question with a question. Instead of he pushing you to the corner, you'll try to ask him a question that would push him to the corner. The Muslim would say, of course. Where does it say Allah is one in being in those exact words? Of course, they could not produce that in the Quran. Where? Because you believe that Allah is only a one being. Did Allah say, I am a one being? So you want me to believe that he is not a one being because Allah did not say that I am a one being? Perhaps the reply of the Muslim would say, well, it doesn't use those words, but the meaning is clear. Exactly. We don't always need an exact formula if the concept is shown clearly. Would you agree? The Muslims say, yes, but Jesus never even claimed to be God in meaning. Then you answer, let's consider this in John 8:58. Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am. Do you know what happened right after that? Then the Muslim will say, oh, they tried to stone him. Why? Because I am is God's name in the Torah. Of course, Muslim believe in the Torah. I am is God's name in the Torah. Exodus 3:14. They knew he was claiming to be divine. That's why they wanted to stone him. They wanted to kill him. He was not just a mere prophet as what the Muslim believe, that Jesus is just a mere prophet. Then Muslim might say, but maybe they misunderstood him. They misunderstood Jesus. Then you say, then why didn't he correct them? Why didn't Jesus correct them if they misunderstood him? Instead, he lets them respond to what they understood, that he had a claim to a deity. Also in John 10:33, they say, you are a mere man, claim to be God. Jesus didn't say, wait, you misunderstood. Why didn't Jesus correct them? Why didn't Jesus tell them, you misunderstood me? But instead, he defended his unity with the Father when he said, I and my Father are one. So Muslim would say, still, he didn't say I'm God. True. Not in the exact sentence, but if he talked like God and accepted worship like God, would a first century Jew call him anything but God? So, here, we are by using Socratic method,
Lumabas naman na kayo.
we
Basta na
have
ba?
we have given them the benefits. The belief of other persons is being clarified. By the way, we already ran out of time. We have exceeded 15 minutes. So I think unless you have some questions, you have some clarifications, feel free.
Doc Peral, Rolly here. Can you hear?
Are you still there?
Yes, yes. Can you hear us?
Yeah, it's raining hard in my position. That is why you might be able to hear some patak ng ulan. Anyway, we have already exceeded 50 minutes. Let us end this with a prayer. Unless you have some announcement or whatever, we will continue next meeting. And next meeting, we will deal with more on Socratic method with theology and biblical issues, which and we will also deal with Muslims. Actually, we are having difficulty in dealing with Muslim. So next meeting, I would like to discuss in dealing with Muslim how to deal with them using Socratic method, because you will find Muslim anywhere in the world. Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, in almost every cities. And we are afraid to deal with them. But I have tried using Socratic method with Muslims, because when I became a research director, I have many Muslim students, and I tried to converse with them. I used Socratic method, and they were open, and they were already quite convinced. The problem was that when I have already established a good relationship with these students, and they had already shown willingness to study the Bible, that was the time that I was invited to be an executive assistant in a municipality in Leyte. So that is why there was, the engagement with Muslim students was cut off. But Socratic method is very useful. Next meeting, we will deal some more of dealing with Muslims. And it's really, really very helpful. Apologetics using Socratic method, very, very useful with Muslims. Then after dealing with Muslims, towards the end of our class, every meeting towards the end, we will now deal with the Bible, Socratic method in dealing with issues, in defending our faith, our distinctive belief, etc., etc. But dealing with Muslims is also very important. Socratic method in apologetics. So thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Any volunteer to offer a closing prayer?
Let us pray, Doc.
Okay, so please.
All right. Dear God, we thank you so much for giving us the time tonight to learn from Dr. Peral and knowledge from you, the wisdom about how we defend your truth to people who do not believe you. May you give us even more wisdom the next meeting we meet. Until we meet again, may your name be glorified. And please forgive us if there is anything we have come short of your glory tonight. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Pastor Uli. God bless and good night,
Amen.
everyone.
Sure.
Thank you, Doc. Everyone.